Welcome to the part of this channel where I actually try. So how's everyone doing? How's everyone been? It's been a long time, so long story. While I was doing the video for the third book, I did reread 92% of Queen of Shadows, the fourth book, which we'll be talking about today. Get ready. Having read 92% of the book, I decided no. And I stopped, and I hadn't made any notes, so I got really discouraged. I just kind of fell off the energy of making the videos. Then, 6 months ago, I was like, let's go. I'm feeling it again. And I reread all, 645 pages of this in less than 24 hours. I read it all, I made all my notes, and the next morning I got up and recorded like 2 hours of me talking. And then as soon as I finished that video, I was like, that was bad. My thoughts were not put together at all. I never edited that video, and now we are back here again. Take 3. I am trying to be a little more structured with this video. There is a script, there is a microphone to hopefully give it a little more structure and a little more coherency. Anyway, I'm Carson, this is Pursued by a Bear, and today we're going to talk about the fourth Throne of Glass book, Queen of Shadows, and all the shit that happens in it. Thank you. Before we get into the actual behemoth of plot in this book, we need to talk about context. So with Queen of Shadows, we are on the 4th of 7 books, and it's the last one that I read before I had to wait for them to be released. Because of that, the 5th book, which we will get to, marked sort of a change in the series for me, both in the way I consumed it and in like the content that was being consumed. And I'll save most of that for its own video, but I do just want to point out that when I read it, I was like, this is no longer a YA series. In case you don't know, there are 2 main genres or categories for popular like teen fiction right now, and that's young adult or YA and new adult. And these aren't genres the same way that fantasy and thriller and romance are genres, but they are genres in the sense of like who your story is targeted to. YA lit can generally be targeted to an age range of like 14 to 18. It aims to be appropriate for like both ends of that spectrum. The main characters usually fall somewhere in that range. This was what was like really popular and really took off when I was in middle school, like Twilight and The Hunger Games and like Six of Crows. New adult, on the other hand, is considered to be a newer categorization, one that has really taken off in the past few years. Targeted at an audience aged about like 19 to your early 20s, new adult basically takes the narrative elements and techniques present in YA. There's usually like a very clear good and evil. You can usually trust what is being presented to you as a reader. So there isn't like a huge amount of critical thinking necessary to engage with the story. This isn't bad, but new adult takes those techniques and just applies them to slightly more mature characters and situations. I find the classification of new adult really interesting in how it developed. We didn't always classify stories that fit those parameters as new adult. While it's true there just haven't been as many popular stories with characters aged early 20s, college years, the differentiation between young adult, adult, and new adult is really a very new phenomenon. So, Carson, what does this have to do with Queen of Shadows? Well, we need to talk about the beginning of the new adult label. The first book that I can remember being marketed as new adult was released in May of 2015. This was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, lovingly nicknamed ACOTAR. This was a like spicy retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I think it was the fact that it was such a well-known young adult writer writing a series too sexual to be marketed as young adult that created the need for the new adult label, because they didn't want 13-year-olds who were reading Throne of Glass to read this. There had to be sort of a middle ground they could create where she kept the popularity, but also they acknowledged that her content had matured. I am sure you will all be delighted to hear that I do not want to talk about ACOTAR. I hate it. Everything that can be said about that book series has been said on the internet already. Why bring this up in the first place then? Because the fourth Throne of Glass book was released in September of 2015. So in the past, I had pinpointed Empire of Storms as a turning point for this series, not only because it changed how I read them, but also because it is very clearly a new adult book. However, this time through, I noticed that Queen of Shadows was way more explicit than I remembered. And I think it's because when I was 14, a lot of it just went like over my head, but now I'm like, they let her market this as YA? Like, my eyes were just like very wide very frequently. These books have always been very violent, but the like sexual nature of it really kicks in here. And this is the beginning of the end, because this is where Sarah and I really differ. From here on out, so many character moments are going to be driven just purely by like sexual desire. Important plot points are going to pause so that we can experience a weird sexual situation, and we are just going to learn a lot about what Sarah J. Maas finds like attractive. I don't really want to know that. There's nothing necessarily wrong with switching up genres that way. The Percy Jackson series is middle grade, The Heroes of Olympus is YA, but what Sarah J. Maas did here is she switched it up in the middle of a series that had up until that point been marketed mostly at like young teenagers. Going from, oh, I'm an assassin in a love triangle, to I'm literally going to blow this guy on a roof right now. It was a little jarring. And all of this just adds to my thesis statement for these videos, which is that Throne of Glass is a series with no idea that there's a brake pedal. We are full throttle all the time from here to the finish line, and Queen of Shadows is the first book in the series where that really starts to feel like a flaw. Like maybe an editor should have paid a little more attention type of flaw. That's my 2 cents. Let's dive into what is actually happening in this goddamn book. So I present to you part 3, Queen of Shadows, or as I like to call it, the Regretssion. It's like regret session and regret and regression. And we're going back to Rifthold. I made you guys a character map. However, despite my best efforts, it still is utterly incomprehensible, so you're just gonna have to trust me as I take you through this. The colors have changed slightly because a lot of my Sharpies died. Red is now main character, which means a significant portion of the book is told from their perspective. Blue is like supporting, somewhat important in some way. Purple is villain. Black is everything else, and then green is like was a main character but is now dead. And then we have like the lines between people. The colors are slightly different because I'm fun like that. Red is romantic. Green is like a direct familial connection. Black is pretty much everything else. Some of them will have like a blue line. That means the relationship and dynamic between those two characters is in some way the driving force of this story in particular. Okay, so where did we leave off? So to represent her like acceptance of her past and her birthright, Selena is now going by Aelin. This really threw me for a loop the first time I read it, and I opened the book and it was like, Aelin. Despite that acceptance, she's back in Rifthold, currently in disguise, and she's dyed her hair red. She's supposed to still be on a mission for the king in Winland, but she figures she has about like 2 weeks before he will declare her a fugitive. In the meantime, she's back with one main goal, which is represented by this line here, to find Arabin Hamel, her old mentor / sort of father figure, who is the king of the Assassins Guild in Rifthold and trained her to be Adarlan's assassin. He also took the amulet of Orinth from her, which is of course the Galathinius family heirloom that contains the 3rd word key. The other 2 are currently in possession of the king of Adarlan. You remember all that? Yeah, easy stuff. Fucking amateur hour over here. Red-headed Aelin finds Arabin pretty quickly. He's hanging out at this like bar / brothel / fighting pit that he owns, and it's called The Vaults. And as she goes to talk to him, she nearly runs into Cale Westfall, former captain of the guard. She's like, oh my god, what is he doing here? Why isn't he still in the palace where he, works? And why was he meeting with Arabin? She then immediately goes on this thought process of like, Arabin knew that I was coming looking for him, so he must have scheduled this meeting with Cale right before I came in to talk to him because he knew that seeing Cale would throw me off my rhythm. This introduces the narrative technique that Sarah J. Maas will employ for the rest of Aelin's Aylin's relationship with Arabin, which is that they basically just play I know that you know that I know that you know that I know with each other the entire book. It's just constant escalation. And that isn't just exclusive to Arabin, because I think Sarah like really wants us to know that Aylin is smart. She's a smart protagonist. And so she's just constantly designing gotcha moments, and especially Arabin and Aylin's relationship is like full of that. We'll talk about that some more at the end, don't worry. So we meet Arabin Hamel for the first time, unless you've read the novellas, but we'll get to that. And he is one of my least favorite characters in the entire series because he's constantly presented as a much bigger problem than he ever actually is. All the characters are constantly telling us he's so scary and powerful, he's such a threat, but then he like never does anything in this book to prove that threat level midnight. He doesn't add anything to the story except for pages. Also, he's just creepy as fuck. And I really think Sarah J. Maas wanted him to be creepy, but I think she also wanted him to be kind of like alluring. So it's a little mixed messages happening. Aylin reunites with Arabin because Arabin tells her that her cousin, Adian Ashriver, is imprisoned and he's set to be executed. Aylin decides that the amulet can wait and teams up with Arabin to rescue Adian. In return, she's going to capture one of the king's soldiers that is possessed by a Valg demon for Arabin so he can like study it. As Aylin is like leaving the vaults, the whole place gets raided and she's like, haha, I called those guards. So, and then after that, she follows Kale's tracks to the sewers where he's hanging out with like the rebels. Kale is basically leading the rebel effort from inside Rifthold now, and he and Aylin like swap stories and they basically realize they are not romantically interested in each other anymore. Kale also has this new friend named Nezrin Falik, and the first time I read this book, I spent like 200 pages like, am I supposed to know who this girl is? No, she's totally new, but you really feel like she should have been a side character before this point. Anyway, Kale also tells Aylin Dorian is imprisoned in the castle. So when I say in prison, he's not really in prison, like he's out and he's doing his own thing, but he's wearing this obsidian collar, and Aylin basically knows that means he's possessed by a Valg prince. She's like, oh, he's done. And Kale's like, no, we can save him. The obsidian clock tower they figured out is part of the spell that trapped magic, so he thinks if they take down the clock tower, magic will be freed. Aylin could access hers and use it to help Dorian. So we currently have two plans happening. Number one, rescue Adian with Arabin's help, and then number two, rescue Dorian with Kale's help, taking down the clock tower and freeing magic. And then on the back burner, we've got the amulet of Orinth and the word keys. So then Aylin goes home to her like apartment she had when she was Otterlin's assassin. Arabin has sent Lysandra to come be the mediator middleman on their prison break plans. Who is Lysandra? Wow, I'm so glad you asked. We have to talk about Assassin's Blade, which is the novellas. Between Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows release, Sarah J. Maas wrote and released this like novella collection called Assassin's Blade. I think it's like 6 stories. I'm gonna be honest, like 3 of them completely interchangeable in my head. So it covers Celaena's life starting when she's with the Assassin's Guild up to her imprisonment in Endovier. They're not very good. I'm just gonna like alert you if things from those stories show up in these. But there is like one important set of dynamics from the novellas that I'm gonna talk about really fast. So travel with me back in time. Oh, this is Celaena again. Okay, pretend. So Celaena was raised and trained by Arabin, who she was also like indentured to, from ages 8 to 17. And in that time, there were other assassin trainees, including Wesley, who was like Arabin's right-hand man, and Sam, who was Celaena's age, and they were like rivals, and then they fell in love. We've touched on this before. Arabin was also buddies with this high-end brothel madam, Clarice. Clarice had indentured courtesans, including Lysandra, who was also the same age as Celaena. Celaena and Lysandra are meant to like be these foils to each other. If Arabin hadn't decided to train her, he probably would have just given her to Clarice, and then she would have grown up like a courtesan like Lysandra. They just like hate each other. A lot of the novella series is just like them throwing things at each other. When Celaena finally pays off her indenture and Sam's, Arabin uses that money to win Lysandra's bidding night. What is a bidding night? Okay, basically, when these like high-end courtesans who have been trained from childhood to be courtesans come of age, men can like bid to be her first client for her virginity, basically. Lysandra is 17 And Arobin bids for her, who is at least in his 30s at this point. And he uses Celaena's money to do that. That, in a microcosm, is just all you need to know about Arobin Hamel. Okay, so the novellas end with Sam's murder. He's murdered by this guy, Rourke Farron. It's revealed right at the end that Arobin actually, set them up. Since then, Lysandra has been kept on as Arobin's, more official mistress, but she's still indentured to Clarice. But back in the present day, goodbye, Celaena. In the present day, Lysandra reveals to Aelin she actually wants to help Aelin double-cross Arobin and, take him down because she and Wesley were genuinely in love. So Lysandra is seeking revenge for her lover. But they're not going to take Arobin down until they get Aedion out. So we got another plan. Either Aelin or Sarah J. Maas has realized, feminism is cool, and they become, besties now. Also, Lysandra has this, younger girl. She's, adopted, Evangeline. Evangeline was bought by Clarice. Now Lysandra takes care of her, but Lysandra also has to pay off her debt. So the day of the execution comes. Aelin sneaks into this celebration they're hosting to kill him with a dance troupe, because it's conveniently revealed here that she was actually trained in ballet. So she's super good at dance. And she comes in to the throne room, and then she disguises herself as a man. She basically ends up framing some dude. Anyway, they rig an explosion, and then she grabs Aedion and her father's ancestral sword, which is just chilling on the dais with him, and they run. And then in the courtyard, they run into Dorian, who is very much possessed by a Valg prince. And when we get in his head, it's Dorian can't even remember his name. We also see that he's been torturing prisoners, not of his own free will, but he's been having a rough time. Aelin tries to appeal to her friend, but it doesn't get through to him, and so she duels him, and she's gonna kill him, but then Nesrin, who's been watching from above, shoots her sword out of her hand at the last second, and Aelin and Aedion escape in Lysandra's carriage. Chaol confronts Aelin about having tried to kill Dorian, and Aelin's I gave him a full minute and he didn't say anything. I'm sorry, he's gone. And then in the midst of all this, Lysandra's oh my god, you're Aelin Ashriver Galathinius. And Aelin's yeah. So she figured that out. Cool. Scheme 1 is out of the way. So now it's time to move on to scheme number 2, which is currently take down Arobin Hamel. Except not really, because first we have a new character we have to talk about. This girly, I know I'm basically out of frame. This girl is Alide Loken, and she's working at Morath. Where's Morath? Oh, why does that name sound familiar? It's because that's where all the witches got sent to at the end of the last book. That's where Duke Parrington is in charge. So Alide Loken. That name might sound familiar to you if you're my star student, because she is the daughter of Cal and Marion Loken. Marion being Evelyn Ashriver's best friend and lady in waiting. And she's the one who sacrificed herself to save Aelin after her parents were assassinated. Aelin and Aedion knew Alide when she was little. Alide has since been missing and no one knows really what happened to her. Her father was executed, so she is technically the true Lady of Parenth, but her evil uncle Vernon, who's just the worst, has usurped that and taken control. She broke her leg when she was a kid, and her leg never healed right because he's kept her in chains pretty much her whole life. Her legs are chained together so she could never run. She walks with a limp and has a pretty shit life. But she's very smart and she wants to escape, so she's been kind of planning, and she plays spy on the battalions of the new Ironteeth witches who have just pulled in. And Manon and the 13 are really chafing under Parrington's rules, but Manon's grandmother, the matron, who doesn't have a name as far as I can tell, has told Manon you have to obey the Duke. Coltane Rompier is also there. We haven't seen her in a long time, and she's basically being kept as Parrington's mistress or something. That's what they think. Completely unresponsive. If you go see her, she just walks around in a daze. Kind of weird. And she also has this raised scar on her forearm. Morath is basically Otterland's Area 51 at this point. There's weird experiments happening in the bowels of the mountain at all times. Only Parrington really seems to know what's going on, but Vernon and Parrington are buddies. So Vernon and the Duke request that Manon send a coven of Ironteeth witches to be experimented on, because they're going to try and breed Valg demons with witches. Okay. Asterin, Manon's second, also her like cousin, is super against this and tells Manon, you cannot do this, because basically in witch culture, pregnancy is really rare. All children are female, so they all become witches, and it's a really big deal when it happens. Everyone's sort of shocked by this suggestion to just like breed witches with demons. Manon ends up sending a Yellowlegs coven that volunteers to do these experiments, and she demotes Asterin from second to third for her insubordinates. Remember, the witches are like, oh, no emotions, but like Manon's really feeling it inside. And then Manon meets Elide when the latter's in her rooms. Manon is like, are you spying on me? And Elide's like, no, I can't even read. Elide's really in this for herself. Manon tries to intimidate her by like flicking Elide's like chin with her iron nails and then like tasting the blood. But this kind of backfires, because as soon as she does, Manon's like, holy shit, this girl has witch blood, which Elide doesn't know. Asterin eventually reveals this to Elide, and Manon suggests that because of her ancestry, she could potentially be a target for her uncle and the Duke's experiments with witches. And she's like, because you have Iron Teeth ancestry, you can be under my protection, but only if you like accept, if she like claims that heritage and accepts the witches as her people, and Elide does, which means she kind of now answers to Manon. So Manon then orders Elide to spy on the experiments being done on the Yellowlegs coven, because the witches have been blocked from entering like that area. Manon then witnesses Cultane doing some weird like shadow magic stuff. When she sees this happening, Cultane tells her that this magic is called shadow fire, which is really the only scene where we see Cultane not sleepwalking, basically. But there is a scene where Elide rescues Cultane from Vernon, who's making some like creepy advances on her. Parrington tells Manon that the shadow fire is a weapon, and the matron witches, the heads of the clans, are developing a way to enhance that weapon. Okay, back to the assassination crew for a second. Nezrin cements herself as one of my favorites because she tells Kale verbatim, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Aelin and Adian bond, and they like share what's happened to them over the past 11 years. Adian's like, oh my god, I can't wait for you to be queen again so I can swear the sacred blood oath to you that only one person can swear in Terrasen tradition. And Aelin's like, haha, yeah, certainly no one has blood sworn anything to me, I gotta go. So then she goes out to this new fighting pit slash brothel slash bar called The Pits, where there are a ton of Valg soldiers like situated, and redhead Aelin enters into the fighting ring under the name Ansel of Briarcliff. All you need to know about Ansel of Briarcliff right now is that Ansel of Briarcliff was a redheaded woman that Aelin met during her adventures in the novellas. She was connected to the Western Wastes, and she and Aelin did not part super well, but Aelin saved her life. Arabin is also at the pits, of course, because he wants Aelin to capture a Valg soldier, because that was their deal. Things escalate in the fighting pit, and Aelin ends up having to kill her opponent, the Valg. Then Aelin follows another Valg into the sewers, where it meets up with what looks like literally one of the stone gargoyles that sits atop the clock tower, and the gargoyle speaks in the king's voice. And Aelin calls it a word hound to remind you that the WYRDs are still important. Aelin, Adian, and Nezrin go out drinking, which is honestly just like a squad. Nezrin should hang out with them more because she's cooler than Kale. And then on the way back, they run into this shadowy figure in the alley, and they're like, oh my god, what's this? But it turns out, yay, it's Rowan. He has cut his hair, which is just funny to me. He's like, I'm sure I'll look less conspicuous if I cut my really long silver blonde hair. And like, yeah, but you still have a whole ass face tattoo. Rowan's back in town because Lorcan, remember Maeve, they're all blood sworn to Maeve, who is evil. Anyway, Lorcan has been sent by Maeve to track down Aelin. Rowan and Adian also like immediately get territorial over who is Aelin's favorite big strong man. And then Rowan starts this great trend. He has this entire book of just revealing people's personal information that he can sense via his face senses. He immediately tells them all. 1, Adian is Gavriel's son, who is another member of his little gang that he's no longer a part of. 2, he immediately reveals that he has already taken a blood oath to Aelin. Adian gets really aggressive and angry about this, which is like not a good look, but then ultimately Aelin calms him down.
Guys, stop fighting, please. Jason, look. This isn't you.
They're like, it's okay, we'll just have more than one. And this whole thing really confuses me because when like this crew swore themselves to Maeve, it like overpowers their free will. She can make them do things. And they're like, Maeve is a villain for this. But then as soon as she breaks this bond between her and Rowan, Rowan turns around and blood swears himself to Aelin. Can Aelin overpower his free will? Or not? Is the only reason Rowan isn't getting overpowered all the time because Aelin's like a good person who won't do that to him? Or is the magic less because Aelin's not as full of fae as Maeve was? I don't know. But then if this is the case, and there's also this tradition in Terrasen for the monarch to have like one blood-sworn warrior, is that oath magic? Because they act like it's the same thing. So could Aelin overpower Aedion if he takes this oath? Did all the kings and queens of Terrasen have like one dude in their court that if they were just feeling shitty for a day, they could like force to bring them things or do things for them? I don't understand why we act like the bond between Rowan and Maeve is the same bond, because if it is, that's a really weird thing to just have be normal. Anyway, so Rowan's back. Unfortunately, it's time for weird sexual tension between him and Aelin because, like, now they're love interests, which is fine. Their scenes in this book suddenly become, like, a weird romance novel. They have to share a bed, and Aelin is like, oh, I'm gonna bother him, and so she wears, like, sexy night dresses to bed. She's like, I'm sorry, is something wrong? And then Rowan's like, no, I have to go, and, like, pours a bucket of ice water over his head. This is a scene in this book. I'm not exaggerating. Like, that literally happens. He goes outside and like pours water on his head. And the other thing is, like, because he's a fairy, we get in his head and he'll be like, oh, she smells so good. Her scent. Stop. It's very weird. I don't really mind their relationship becoming romantic, but I really appreciated the fact that a relationship as intense as theirs and like as significant as theirs was platonic. Aelin, Aedion, Rowan, and Lysandra, they're still planning their takedown of Erebin by capturing this Valg soldier named, like, Stephen. That was, like, his human name before he was possessed by a Valg. And in another moment of Rowan just revealing shit based on her scent, he can tell Lysandra is also a magic user. She's a shapeshifter who currently can't shift because of the magic ban. No one knew this except Lysandra. Also, I'm a little confused about it because I don't know if she's just, like, a magic human or if this means she's part fae. We don't really touch on that. Meanwhile, Kale and Nezrin are searching for prisoners who have been disappearing and eventually learn that the prisoners are being sent to Morath, presumably to be experimented on. What's up in Morath? Well, Alide finds a chamber where the Yellowlegs Coven is being kept, and the door is opened by a man wearing an obsidian collar who's blonde. Oh, do you know who this guy is? It's Roland Haviljard. It's Roland Haviljard, Dorian's first cousin. He got sent to Morath at the end of book 2. Alide sees that the Yellowlegs Coven have given birth to like Valg offspring. She describes them as looking like gargoyles with black fangs. Asterin is furious when Alide reports back and she blames Manon for like letting this happen. Manon grapples with her guilt over it, and Alide comforts her by telling her the story of her own family history and how she secretly believes that Aelin Galathinius is alive. Okay, I'm getting tired of Erebin hanging around, so let's get this over with. So he hosts a dinner party to bring their demon captive to. Erebin interrogates him about the ring and how it works before just like cutting off his hand and beheading him. The rings are another confusing magical element to me because they're meant to make you like obedient. I thought it was whoever makes them, but maybe it's just to whoever gives you one. Erebin has really been getting his creep on. He sent Aelin before this dinner party body oil that smells like his scent to like rub it on her body. And is like, oh, you smell so good when he sees her. And then Rowan pulls the rug out from under him. I also used your body oil, bitch. Erebin's like, ugh. And the whole time they're at this dinner party, Rowan and Aelin are communicating telepathically. Guys, I just realized I didn't put this in my notes, and it's very important to me that you know this. Aelin and Rowan have telepathic communications throughout this entire book. But I'm very confused by it because the first time I read it, I was like, oh, they can do this because they're bonded so many ways. And then I watched this video with Sarah J. Maas where someone like asked her, are they actually communicating telepathically? And she was like, no. They just like can read each other's eyes really well. They're not actually like beaming words into each other's brains. 17-year-old Aelin must have been a delight to deal with. I would pay good money to see 17-year-old Aelin meet 17-year-old Rowan. 17-year-old Rowan wouldn't have known what to do with you. He could barely speak to females outside his family. Liar. I don't believe that for a second. It's true. You would have scandalized him with your night clothes, even with that dress that you have on. He would probably have been even more scandalized to learn I'm not wearing any undergarments beneath this dress. You got that from her eyes? Back to the map. Take it away, me. Arobynn can't hear their telepathic thoughts, obviously, but he picks up on the fact that they're flirting with each other and he's all mad. After he kills Stephen, he and Aelin talk about their plans and she asks him to return her family's amulet. And he does, but he also slips the wordstone ring he just got from Stephen on her finger and commands her to tell him she loves him. She's like, I love you.
I hear. And I obey.
And then he sends her out and is like, tell no one about this. But when they get home, Aelin just slides the ring off and reveals that she'd given Stephen a fake ring. So Arobynn would take the fake one so that she could see what he was planning to do with it. And she's basically like, well, that was boring, that his whole play was to try and make me be in love with him. She's not wrong. But what's important here is that they have the third word key. Aelin and Lysandra still pretend to hate each other when Arobynn's around, but she leaves Lysandra a note saying he's all yours. And that night, as he's asleep, Lysandra stabs him and kills him. Great. Now it is time for... Aelin plans to use Hellfire, which is basically wildfire from Game of Thrones, which is basically Greek fire from Percy Jackson and the Olympians. We've all been there. To bring down the clock tower. So they go to look for this black market stash. They find it, but they also find this weird underground temple made out of bones dedicated to a deity called a Sin Eater. And it's covered in people writing on the walls confessions of the lies that they've told. Aelin realizes this temple is really old and it dates back to Gavin's time. They use his sword, Damaris, which they got way back in book 1, to find his confession. And it's the story of Gavin and Elena, which everyone thinks they know already, but Gavin's version of the truth is different. The war Gavin and Elena fought against the Valg was led by a Valg king named Erawan, and after they sealed the word gates using the word keys, Erawan was still trapped in this world. Now, in the history books, it says they killed him. He says, no, we couldn't kill him. We used the Eye of Elena amulet to lock him in a sarcophagus that they buried underneath the Black Mountains. And in the modern tongue, Black Mountains translates to Morath. So they realized the king is trying to awaken Erawan. If you are getting confused about who the big bad is in this series, don't worry, so was I, and also so am I. And in Morath, Kaltain has started just burning down villages with Shadowfire on the Duke's orders. If Hellfire is wildfire from Game of Thrones, Shadowfire is like Shadow Baby, but not a baby. Just black fire that can tear through people and kill them. Manon feels guiltier and guiltier about this. And then one day, Roland Haviljard breaks into the 13's rooms. The Valg prince taunts them, but when he meets Manon's eyes, he panics and Roland breaks through and he begs for her to kill him, and she does. Goodbye, Roland. So soon after, Manon gets word from her grandmother. The 13 are meant to fly out and meet with the matrons and the king in this forest rendezvous, and she tells Alide to lay low while she's gone. After this temple discovery, Aelin and Rowan are ambushed by Lorcan, who demands the third word key and tells them that Maeve didn't send him. He actually came by himself. Athril's gold ring, Maeve's old boyfriend, which Aelin returned to Maeve at the end of the third book, was not a sentimental token, but actually grants immunity from Valg possession. So Lorcan has stolen the ring and run to them because he believes if Maeve possesses the word keys but is immune to everything, she will be destroyed by power. He's in love with Maeve, so he wants to destroy the word keys to protect her. We now have so many teams working with the word keys because Lorcan isn't on the good guy's side. He's just doing his own thing. This whole conversation is interrupted by Evangeline, totally distraught because, okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
Aelin basically rigged up a bunch of faked court documents to say that Selena Sardothian inherits all of Arabynn's shit when he died, including leadership of the Assassin's Guild, and she then sold all of that back to his buddies who currently are part of the Assassin's Guild to get some funds for her eventual takeover of Terrasen. This is what all that shit with the fighting pits is about. She's like, I raided the vaults to screw with him, but then she encourages him to invest in the pits so he'll still be super rich when she kills him and she gets all his money. when she like reveals this, like Rowan and Aiden are like, wow, you're so genius. It drives me up a wall. So she thinks she got the last word on him, only for it to be revealed that Arobynn actually knew she and Lysandra were partnered up and set up a contingency plan so that if he died, word would be sent and he'd turn her in for being a magic user. Even after death, Arobynn is causing problems. His final revenge means Lysandra has been arrested, and the gang soon gets word a new prisoner is being taken with the king and the crown prince to be transferred to Morath during their meeting with the Iron Teeth wing leader in the woods. Our plots are finally converging. In this meeting in the woods, they figure out the witch matrons have built these giant ass mirrors to enhance Shadowfire as it like rips through the king's enemies. Lysandra is being kept in a prison wagon nearby, and the Rifthold crew being like bop 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 bop. Yeah, is like hanging out in the woods trying to bust her out while this handoff between the grandma and the king is happening. And the matrons and the king are talking. Manon is bored and she goes and approaches Dorian. And a weird thing happens here. It's from Dorian's perspective. And when he meets her eyes, the Valg prince inside his head is like fearful and retreats. And Dorian speaks as himself for the first time in weeks and remembers his name. I mentioned in my last video that Manon has golden eyes, the eyes of the Valg kings, because of the Iron Teeth ancestry. That's what this is. The Valg prince like recognizes her as a Valg king. Like she has power over them. Chaol and Aelin overhear that exchange. Chaol goes absolutely rogue after this and tries to turn this rescue into a 2-for-1. But because he's an idiot,
you are the dumbest boy alive.
Immediately runs into the 13. The rest of the crew comes to save his ass. As a result, they meet Manon for the first time. Cool. To kind of save her friends, Aelin reveals her true identity to Manon and is like, I killed the witch Baba Yellowlegs, which is pretty effective at starting a fight.
Things to say that will always start a fight.
I killed the witch Baba Yellowlegs. Aelin and Manon duel in the second most badass scene in this whole book. And then there's this like fun parallel situation. Rowan takes an arrow in the shoulder for Aelin, causing Aelin to like scream out in horror. Then Manon gets pinned by falling debris. And then Asterin is like screaming for her. And Aelin sees this and can't leave Manon to die, so she frees her. And then Manon owes Aelin a life debt. And the Rifthold crew escapes. The two groups head back to their respective home bases. We're gonna get Dorian, but in Morath, Manon gets a bunch of intel reports from Parrington and puts together all this stuff with the Valg and the Collars and the possession. Vernon has imprisoned Alide while the witches were away, and Manon is so wrapped up in the Valg stuff that she hasn't noticed. So then Asterin comes to Manon and tells her this whole story about how when they were younger, I mean they were mortal, but years ago, Asterin took a human lover and became pregnant. The matron was initially like ecstatic. It was a huge honor to bear a witchling. She took care of Asterin during the pregnancy in preparation for the witchling's birth, but Asterin's daughter was stillborn. Immediately, the matron turns on her and she brands Asterin's lower back with the word unclean, considering her failure a mark of shame for the clan. Manon was away at the time and knew none of this, so Asterin uses his story to tell her like why she's so upset about the breeding stuff, and then she tells Manon she serves Manon, not the matron. Manon, in the middle of the night, flies to Rifthold on Abraxos and paints a message that reads, "Witch killer, the human is still inside him." As repayment for Aelin saving her life, she tells them Dorian can be saved. In the aftermath of the Lysandra rescue, Aelin frees Lysandra and Evangeline from their debts to Clarice, and they get the Hellfire in place and prepare to confront the king. Aelin acts as Selena, pretending to be returning from Winland, with Chaol as her like captured prisoner. The king grants them an audience, but has figured out Aelin's true identity, and he gets a villain monologue while they wait for Aedion and Rowan to blow up the clock tower. But Rowan and Aedion have gotten sidetracked because those wordhound things have showed up, so Aelin taunts Dorian into chasing her down while Chaol faces off against the king. Then Lorcan appears and helps Rowan and Aedion. They finally blow up the tower. Magic is freed across the continent. Manon feels its return at Morath, so does Coltane. That's important. The boys are almost overrun by a Valg regiment, but then Lysandra shows up in ghost leopard form, which is like a giant big black cat, and just like eats a million Valg. And Nezrin gives them cover from the air because she's an archer. In the first most badass scene of this book, Aelin and Dorian have a duel. She tries to remind him who he is and slides Athryl's ring onto his finger that she stole back from Lorcan. They are flinging their like respective ice and fire magic at each other. It's super cool. Kael, meanwhile, is pummeled by the king's black magic and becomes paralyzed from the waist down. Dorian sees him and thinks his friend is dead, and that is what allows him to fully break out of the Valg control, and he and Aelin then turn their magic on the king. They've nearly destroyed him, and then he comes back to himself and reveals that he and Parrington went to Morath when they were boys with the Eye of Elena amulet. Erwin awoke and he overtook Parrington's body. The king has been possessed for years by another Valg demon. So like the evil king is not really Dorian's father. And so like now as he's dying, he's come back to the real king. So here in book 4 of 7, we learn that our big bad is actually Duke Parrington, aka Erwin, and not the king. And then we kill the king. The king just dies. Okay, and I don't think I ever actually mentioned this in the first video, but the reason the first book is called Throne of Glass and the way it ties into its original like Cinderella origins is the castle is actually partially made of glass. There's like a stone castle and a glass castle, and the stone castle is like inside the glass castle. I don't know why. Anyway, in this scene, as they kill the king, Dorian shatters the glass castle with his powers and then refuses the glass into a wall surrounding the castle so the debris doesn't hurt anyone. And Dorian and Aelin basically take the city of Rifthold. But we are not done because of more wrath. Vernon plans to breed allied with some Valg, but Manon finally realizes she's missing and goes to rescue her from the dungeon. She grabs allied and they prepare to fight their way out until they run into Coltane on the stairs. Coltane trades clothes with Allied. They look kind of similar, and she says she'll buy them time. She then slices open the scar on her arm and reveals a sliver of black stone. The second word key has been like inside Coltane. She gives it to Allied and tells her to bring it to Selena Sardothian to repay her for a warm cloak in a cold dungeon. The 13 and Allied fly out of Morath while Coltane uses her magic to basically blow up the entire mountain compound and herself. And we have finally hit Act 5, which is the falling action. Manon tells Allied that she met Aelin. Aelin is alive, and then she sends Allied to Terrasen to find her queen. Lorcan retakes Athryl's ring from Aelin, and she gives him a fake amulet with a pretend word key, and he disappears. Nezrin tells Kael her homeland, the southern continent, which we have not been to, has healers who could help him with his paralysis, and also they could recruit allies for Dorian and Aelin down there, so they ship out to the south, and also they're dating now. Okay, Manon and Astrid and the 13 are united again, and they're preparing to face off for the matron in defense of their actions. Manon flies out one night to Rifthold and observes Dorian freed. He sees her like hanging around. Yeah, and Dorian's king of Otterland now. Aelin, Rowan, Adian, Lysandra, Evangeline, and Fleetfoot, Aelin's dog, all head north back to Terrasen in the hopes of reclaiming Aelin's throne. And we are done with book 4. Oh my god. I think I'm done. I think I'm done. I think I'm done. Thank you and good night. I said way back in the beginning of this, Throne of Glass is a series that doesn't know how to deaccelerate. And that's true. But I also said way back in the beginning of this, everything Sarah J. Maas writes in this series is important. And that's not true, I've come to realize. It's not that everything she writes is important, it's that everything she writes could be. This woman loves a plot twist, so much so that reveals that have like little to no implications for the greater plot are treated with the same gravity that like Kael's discovery of Aelin's true identity is at the end of book 2. Sarah J. Maas likes knowing things that you don't know. She likes the audience to not know what is important until she can drop this sheet and like, ta-da, the answer to us. So what she does to achieve that is she sets everything up to potentially have a reveal behind it. And a lot of things do. Aelin and Arobyn's entire relationship in this book is just a series of increasingly ridiculous reveals. But there are also a lot of like weird fragments just left out to dry. And then she scrambles to pay those off in any meaningful way. The character that we're going to talk about as an example of this right now is Roland Haviljard. Narratively, Roland is a really weird character because he's set up to be the significant supporting character in book 2, but the only thing he ever does in that book is annoy Chaol and Dorian and then gets like a wordstone ring from the king. The moment that is written to be the payoff for that initial setup is his death scene, but that doesn't occur until a book and a half later, and we've pretty much forgotten him by then. Or we just don't care. It could have been anyone possessed by a Valg who breaks into Manon's room and begs to be killed by her. That's not the important part of the scene. The important part is the eyes. We don't like Roland, so we don't get any like emotional depth out of his death. There's nothing that relies on him as a character. And what this really illustrates is how Sarah J. Maas tricks us, and me specifically, who's doing this, into thinking parts of her story are important. Because while reading book 2, if we see Roland being set up as this secondary antagonist, we think he's important. And if we think he's important, then we think Dorian's reaction to and interactions with him are important. But then Roland is rendered useless as a character by book 4, and retrospectively, we can see his only purpose was to distract us from the fact that Dorian had nothing to do in book 2. She created Roland to give Dorian something to deal with, but it never pays off into anything bigger than that, and therefore those parts of book 2 where we see them sort of butting heads, that's also rendered useless. And that's the real problem with these books. Reading a Sarah J. Maas book is like going to a play and you watch a character hang like 20 guns on the wall, and then by the end of the play, like 16 have gone off, 1 was used to like club someone over the head, and 3 were just used for firewood. Technically, we used all of those guns. Did we really need them to be guns in the first place? Couldn't we have just gotten some firewood or like broken the fucking leg off a chair or something? Please. Also, my ears are fucking ringing because I just listened to 16 guns go off in a row. Like, I'm tired. And you know what? At that point, I'm not that invested in when the next gun is gonna go off. I feel like it's getting a little convoluted. This is a Chekhov's gun metaphor. There's a ton of characters that this happens with. Like, why does Holland Haviljard exist? That's Dorian's younger brother. Did you know about him? I don't know. His brother is sort of set up as this potential threat, and yet we never interact with him. Knox Owen. Y'all remember him? He's Celaena's friend. He was a main supporting character, and he just vanished into the night. No way. He'll be back. We haven't seen him yet, and we're over halfway through the series at this point. Unless he comes in and saves the day, he does not. I don't know the point of having him run off. Why not just kill him? There's other things about these books that grate on my nerves. Sarah J. Maas uses a lot of like repetition of these phrases. People's lips are constantly sensual. Everyone's got sensual lips in these books. I don't know why. I don't know what that means. Anyway, I don't know how to end this now. The point. What's the point, guys? What am I doing? The point is these books aren't good, but they are really good at tricking you into thinking they're good. Sarah J. Maas is gaslighting me. Sarah J. Maas and all of her characters are the epitome of gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. Guys, this has been my analysis of Queen of Shadows, and I really hope you enjoyed it. God help me, I will be back with part 4 and the 5th book at some point in the future. We do not know when. I am George R. R. Martin now. Okay, that maybe is, you know what I mean. It could be years. Even if we're, in our 40s, I hope that I can still be here to stop you from reading Throne of Glass and instead just telling you everything that happens. I'm Carson. This is Pursued by a Bear. If you want to hang out, subscribe. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. done. I'm gonna have to read that fucking moan line, aren't I? Guys. Then he thoroughly, brazenly surveyed her body, his nostrils flaring delicately, as he scented exactly what she wanted. Her breathing turned ragged as he dragged his stare to hers, hungry, feral, unyielding. Not yet, he said roughly, his own breathing uneven. Not now. Why? It was an effort to remember speech with him looking at her like that, like he might eat her alive. Heat pounded through her core. Okay. I want to take my time with you, to learn ... every inch of you. And this apartment has very, very thin walls. I don't want to have an audience when I make you moan, Aelin. I don't think it's fair we fixate on bullying Cassandra Clare on TikTok when this passage exists.